History deserves to be remembered for many reasons. It might be dramatic, it might be funny, it might simply be a good story that teaches us lessons that we can use in the present or in the future. But history also deserves to be remembered because it might be nostalgic, uh, a piece of the past that brings back fond memories. 66 years ago, on September 12th, 1959, a television show premiered. It would air for 14 seasons and then on in syndication in a way that few shows have. It was groundbreaking in its way. It could be powerful. It sometimes was maybe a little bit silly, but it certainly touched generations of viewers, including this one. Bonanza, the saga of the Cartwright family on the Ponderosa Ranch, was created for the express purpose of selling color television sets. But it brought color into a lot of lives. Bonanza aired from 1959 to 1973, a total of 431 episodes. I was young at that time. It actually premiered before my birth, but I saw a handful of seasons when it first aired. Like many, my experience with Bonanza was largely in syndication, a place where the show still finds success today. If you aren't familiar with the show, well, wow. But it followed the lives of patriarch Ben Cartwright and his three sons, Adam, Hoss, and Little Joe, as they managed the Ponderosa Ranch near Carson City, Nevada in the mid-1860s. Mary Ellen Snodgrass, a writer of reference works, explained in 2023, the series' formula, simple and unassuming in its appeal, lured fans with the familiarity of a cohesive television family. While the Western genre was well established when the show premiered, Bonanza was deliberately conceived to challenge that genre. Barry Silverstein, who writes about popular culture, noted of Westerns at the time, typically rowdy cowhands would get drunk, gunslinging bad guys would terrorize a town, Indians would be depicted as marauding savages, and sheriffs would keep the peace. There was always lots of gunfights between good guys and bad guys. Bonanza would challenge that narrative. Davy Dortor was an already successful producer and writer of the television series Restless Gun, which aired on NBC between 1957 and 1959. It followed the typical formula. The New York Times described the main character, Vint Bonner, played by actor John Payne, as the traditional Hollywood role of a roving gunman who settles the conflict in each episode and establishes right and wrong by shooting the bad guy. But Dortor had another vision. The Times writes, Restless Gun was broadcast on NBC, and the network asked Mr. Dortor to develop a Western for NBC itself to produce. An opportunity that Mr. Dortor, who studied American history at City College of New York and believed his familiarity with the subject was the equal of that of anyone in Hollywood, seized upon to combat what he called the myth of the lone gunfighter. Dortor explained in a 2002 interview with the Archive of American Television, the gunfighter played a small, inconsequential role in the story of the West. The true history of the West is about family, pioneers. The Television Academy Foundation writes, Bonanza differs from other Westerns in its relative use of violence and shootouts. Conflicts were resolved through dialogue between the main characters and guest stars. Bonanza has been described as the first family-friendly Western. But the show had another purpose as well. The Times continues. Because the show was to be partially shot on location, and because color television sets were on the verge of being readily available to consumers, Mr. Dortor urged the network to film Bonanza in color, and it became television's first full-hour Western in color. This was clearly a risk, as Silverstein notes, Bonanza premiered in late 1959, only 5 years after the introduction of color television. Creating color TV shows was brand new and very expensive. But Dortor's show had a certain advantage. NBC was owned by the RCA Company, a producer of color televisions. The newspaper Nevada Appeal explains, ironically, the creation of Bonanza was not to compete with other Westerns, but to sell color television sets. At the time, RCA, parent company of NBC, was perfecting color television technology and needed a program on the air to showcase the new medium. The show's location, set in the Lake Tahoe region of Nevada and California, was specifically chosen because of its rugged scenery and vibrant colors. The website Gigster writes, several locations throughout the U.S. provided a backdrop for the Bonanza production. California brought most scenes to life, using the majestic beauty of the mountains, rivers, and lakes as a backdrop. One popular filming location was Lake Hemet, a reservoir in the San Jacinto Mountains, Riverside County, California. The production team also filmed at Lake Tahoe, in a backlot of Paramount Studios, and Wildwood Regional Park in Thousand Oaks. The color scenery was such a part of the show that the fictional 1,000-acre Ponderosa Ranch was described by producers as the show's fifth character. The impact was all that you would have dreamed of. Jim Brewer writes on the website Boomer Memories. We sat spellbound while the peacock spread its colorful feathers, then watched in amazement as the foursome rode up on horseback, greeting the audience, and then went on to solve problems on their massive Nevada ranch at Ponderosa. It was only color, but you would have thought that we were seeing the first Martians land on Earth. Color, the New York Times explained, helped distinguish it from competitors like Laramie and Gunsmoke. But still, the show struggled. It originally was broadcast on Saturday evening, opposite the popular legal drama Perry Mason, where it struggled. Color was, to an extent, a liability, as the Saturday Evening Post explains. Color wasn't cheap. Bonanza almost got canceled early on because of its larger budget. A change of time slot, however, saved the show. The New York Times wrote, 2 years later, it moved to 9 p.m. on Sunday and became a dominant hit, running for 14 seasons, including 3 years, from 1964 to 1967, when it was the most watched television show in the country. Popular culture writer Jeremy Roberts notes that it was by far the most popular series of the 1960s. The Saturday Evening Post explains the ongoing saga of rancher Ben Cartwright, his sons, and the action and drama surrounding their Ponderosa ranch clicked with audiences. Bonanza broke through as the first show to stay in the Nielsen Top 5 for 9 consecutive seasons. The popularity was about more, however, than just color. Certainly represented not just a refreshingly new but more accurate depiction of the West. Dortor told the New York Times, the idea of Bonanza, as the show came to be called, was to depict the story of the American West, one of the great migrations of all times, with accuracy. The Tahoe Daily Tribune notes, thanks to Dortor, who had an encyclopedic knowledge of Northern Nevada history, 7 of Bonanza's first 10 episodes were stories based on actual events that took place in Virginia City's past. The plots could literally be called history. That deserves to be remembered. It was a well-produced show. Silverstein writes that the production quality was superb, from the opening title with a map that burst into flames as a memorable theme song plays, to top-notch scenic panoramas around the Lake Tahoe, Nevada area that rivaled motion pictures of the day. The Television Academy Foundation also notes that famous guest stars such as Yvonne DiCarlo, Ida Lupino, Barry Sullivan, Ricardo Cortez, and Jack Carson added to the show's popularity. But central to the show's success was the relationship between the Cartwright family. Canadian actor Lorne Greene played family patriarch Ben Cartwright. Pernell Roberts played the eldest son Adam, the intellectual. Dan Blocker played the sweet-tempered giant called Hoss, and if you didn't know, the character's given name was Eric. And Michael Landon played the youngest, hot-headed, romantic little Joe. The casting was by deliberate choice, the Tahoe Daily Tribune explains. When the show was under development, its biggest controversy was the casting of the Cartwright clan. NBC execs wanted known actors in the major roles, while Dortor lobbied for new faces to give Bonanza a fresh look and let the new actors develop their characters. Thankfully, Dortor won out on the issue. The commitment to the portrayal of family was sincere. Dortor named Ben Cartwright after his own father. Even then, the show deviated from the norm of the traditional nuclear family portrayed on television at the time. Ben Cartwright was a widower 3 times over, with each of his 3 sons having different mothers. Silverstein notes, the Bonanza family, on the other hand, had no matriarchal presence. It was up to Ben Cartwright to raise his 3 sons through adulthood. But the emphasis on family values remained prominent. Cartwright modeled moral behavior for his sons with compassion and a good dose of tough love. Even with sibling rivalry, the Cartwrights were a loyal, loving family. The series didn't shy away from challenges that ensued when the young men got into various conflicts. There may have been some occasional fisticuffs, but there was rarely any shooting. It is a definitively different message for a Western. When asked what the message of the show was, Dortor replied, "What is the message? Love is the message." It resonated. Research scientist Charlene DeKalb recalled that the family was what connected her to the show. I think the reason Bonanza appealed to me so much as a child was because of the strong family dynamics. The Cartwrights didn't always get along, but they loved and supported each other. And the show had a wonderful sense of morality and optimism. But there was more to the show. The New York Times writes, in addition to telling stories based on historical events involving the Comstock Lode and the ongoing Civil War, the show dealt with themes like racial prejudice and religious tolerance. Silverstein writes, perhaps the most unusual aspect of Bonanza is how it pushed the boundaries of television on social issues. Television networks at the time were beholden to large advertisers who essentially funded the programs, so controversy was typically to be avoided at all costs. David Dortor clearly had something else in mind, and thankfully, NBC agreed to his vision. Television critic Samuel Williamson explains on the website Collider, While this was a Western show with your typical fun cowboy shenanigans, it was also one that found a lot of importance in exploring ideas surrounding morality, looking out for those around you, and even tackling racism in certain episodes. It's nice to have shows that you throw out just for entertainment, but when you have programs like this that aren't afraid to make people think, that's when you've got something special. This could be awkward by modern standards, but in its time it was groundbreaking. The Television Academy Foundation notes, for example, the Ponderosa Ranch's cook. The cook at Ponderosa was Hop Sing, a Chinese immigrant. Played by Victor Sen Young, he was presented in the traditional subservient role reserved for minorities in the period the show was produced. He spoke with a heavy accent, wore generic Asian clothes and long braided hair, and he always delivered words of wisdom. In several episodes, the family engaged in various conflicts with outsiders to protect Hop Sing against discrimination. In doing so, the show foregrounded the racial discrimination in the historical period, as well as the ongoing racial conflicts in the 1960s. For a family-friendly Western, Bonanza took on issues of the day. Anti-Semitism in the episode Look to the Stars. Interracial marriage in the episode The Lonely Man. It notably took on prejudice against black people in Enter Thomas Bowers, aired at the height of the Civil Rights Movement in 1964. The show regarding prejudice against a black opera singer was controversial enough that Silverstein notes that General Motors questioned whether it should be aired, but decided to sponsor it anyway. While tame by today's standards, the show actually managed to do something unexpected of a primetime popular Western. It was important. The New York Times wrote at the time, certainly in the context of mass drama, the happy ending bespoke the changing times of the 1960s. For the viewer, there was a rewarding sense of satisfaction in seeing the good guys win on a straightforward matter of principle. Last night's Bonanza could be more important than many a show that noisily boasts of its feeling of protest and indignation. Certainly it was a creature of its time. Roberts complained that the show was too careful in its messaging, but the network was cautious with its #1 hit. Roberts left the show after 6 years, frustrated with his character's development and calling the show junk television. But as Williamson notes, to get to the 2020s, you need to lay out a few stepping stones first. You need a show like Bonanza. For a Western in the late 50s to early 70s, it really feels like they did what they could. Perhaps one of the more notable ways that the show addressed issues was when real tragedy struck the cast. On May 13, 1972, Dan Blocker underwent what was called routine gallbladder surgery. He suffered a pulmonary embolism and passed away at the age of 43. After 13 seasons, the lovable Hoss was gone. Lauren Green later said, "I didn't see how the show could continue. I said to my wife, that's it, it's finished." But producers did something nearly unprecedented for the time. Actor Eddie Deason wrote in 2011, "This was to be the first time in television history that a show had dealt with, or even mentioned, the death of one of its characters." Producer Richard Collins said, "Just as we personally suffered a loss, so the audience suffered one too." While the character's death, in a subsequent series described as having drowned saving a life, was not directly portrayed, the season 14 premiere, entitled Forever and written by co-star Michael Landon, was a tribute to Blocker. The episode, featuring the death of Joe's new bride and child, was originally entitled Hoss's Dream and was to feature Blocker. Hoss's death is mentioned, and grief shown in the episode stands in for grief over his loss, a portrayal made more compelling because of the actor's own grief at the death of their friend. The powerful episode set a precedent for how shows would handle such tragedies in the future. But it was too much of a blow. The show lasted through that season, but ratings slumped. While it was still getting good views, it fell for the first time in years from Nielsen's top 10, and the network decided to cancel. The announcement was sudden, surprising the cast and crew with no episode to wrap up the story. Deason writes, "Every TV show that gets canceled has reasons to explain its demise. But the fact of the matter is that no one really cared to watch the show anymore after the passing of the beloved Hoss. Somehow, it just wasn't the same." Bonanza was the second longest running TV Western of all time behind Gunsmoke. It was listed both in TV Guide's Top 60 Greatest TV Dramas of All Time and TV Guide's Top 50 Greatest Television Shows of all time. It was nominated for 16 Emmys. It won 3. Williamson notes that younger audiences might not be too familiar with it today, but Bonanza was one of the most important and influential series of all time. Various attempts to do reboots or sequels or spin-offs have
been tried with little success. The cast has all passed away. Lauren Green in 1987, Michael Landon in 1991, Parnell Roberts in 2010. I won't lie to you, I love the show. I share the sentiment of Charlene DeKalb, who says that other shows have become near and dear to me in time, but a piece of my nostalgic heart will always belong to Bonanza. I remember watching it with my father when I was young, and in retrospect, so was he. And I remember watching it later, towards the end of his life, when he was old. And in retrospect, so was I, in the recliners in his living room. It's part of what developed my love of history. I remember watching it with my roommates in college. We would gather together at noon in between classes in the sort of dirty little apartment that you would expect when you had no money, sitting in what we called furniture, which was actually the bucket seats that had been taken out of cars that one of my roommates had wrecked. It was at times really funny, sometimes maybe a bit campy, other times really powerful, but I never felt patronized. I never felt preached at. I just felt entertained. And that deserves to be remembered. I hope you enjoyed watching this episode of The History Guy, and if you did, please feel free to like and subscribe and share The History Guy with your friends. And if you also believe that history deserves to be remembered, then you can support The History Guy as a member on YouTube, a supporter on our community at Locals, or as a patron on Patreon. You can also check out our great merchandise shop or book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo.